Starbucks, man. Starbucks is coming to its senses. Slow clap for Starbucks.
Not that I go there, but just welcome the news.
Me too. I've always been a Dunkin' guy, loyal to them. I like local stuff as well, but if I had to pick a chain, I've always been a fan of Dunkin' Donuts. Just so happen to have one of the few around the metro a minute from the house, which is a nice perk. Not why I moved there 5 years ago now, but it's a nice perk.
When I was in college, the closest one was in Lawrence. So we'd drive there on a Saturday to go get donuts and coffee sometimes.
Oh, that's great. That's great, Mark.
Boomer story. I've sold, I remember when they were here and left the market, so they get no dollars from me upon their return. That's me.
That's you, John.
What can I say?
Hey, John's a man of principles.
I hold a grudge. Yeah.
All right, yes.
Hold a grudge, principles, whatever.
He's been known to hold a grudge or two in his day. So Starbucks has reversed course on a 2018 policy where they said you could just come here and hang out, pee all over the place, do what you want to do, harass people, have a good time. You don't have to buy anything. You just sit around here and do what you want. Life's good. Well, now, no more. Hanging out at Starbucks, well, now you have to order something. Thank you, Starbucks, for doing what most businesses require you to do. If you're going to spend time in the business, I mean, unless it's like a clothing store, but if you're talking a coffee shop, right, you got to like buy something to sit there for an hour. If you want to open up your laptop or do anything, certainly if you want to use the restroom. So this month, Starbucks rolling out new code of conduct at cafes across North America, aiming to improve guests and staff's safety and experience. Included in the shift is a reversal of a nearly 7-year policy of allowing the general public to linger or use the bathroom regardless of whether they buy a latte or a croissant. The new change in policy includes adding signs banning harassment, violence, threatening language, outside alcohol, smoking, panhandling, according to employees' notices viewed by the Wall Street Journal. The new code of conduct for customers is part of the coffee giant's effort to make its stores more hospitable, and it seeks to reverse a slide in customer traffic and falling sales. Who would have thought people, and let's be honest, these Starbucks are in many major American cities. You go to New York and some of these major urban towns, they're on every street corner in some of these downtowns. Who would have thought that people don't want to buy coffee and get harassed by homeless folks on the way in and the way out? Who would have thought they don't want to deal with a drunk homeless person as they're trying to order a latte? Who would have thought that that actually would have impacted your bottom line? I can't believe it. Now, let's go back to 2018 here for a second. In 2018, that's when this all kicked off. You may recall the story, and I seem to remember this happening shortly after I got here. And then I look back, and it was on April 15th of 2018. I'm reading this story from the Wall Street Journal from almost 7 years ago now. Starbucks faces backlash over arrest of black men. What was that story? That story, Starbucks since 2018 has allowed its cafes and bathrooms, regardless of purchase, to be used by anybody. The policy was a response to the arrest of 2 men at one of its Philadelphia locations that year, after one of them attempted to use the bathroom while the other one sat. Employees told the police that the men were trespassing because they hadn't bought anything and refused to leave after they were denied use of the restroom, authorities said at the time. The incident drew widespread criticism, and Starbucks afterward temporarily closed all of its U.S. stores to conduct racial sensitivity training. The men later sued the company and settled for an undisclosed amount. So what did Starbucks do? This was the build up to 2020. The apex of this stupidity was 2020, but it was building during the Trump years. Everybody was so Trump triggered. This became the norm. Jussie Smollett, Juicy Smollett, as some may call him, through stories like this at Starbucks in 2018. Of course, it all ascended to the George Floyd riots. But instead of Starbucks being like, maybe that wasn't handled great, and instead of doing what they should have done, and I know that so many of these corporations, they don't want to bother fighting things in court. It brings on more bad publicity. It's, spending money. They just want to settle these things and get out. And I understand that to some degree. But at the same time, you got to have a backbone. You got to stand up for what's right. And at the time, Starbucks didn't do it. They bent the knee to the woke mob. And the woke mob only got stronger and stronger and more defiant as they got win after win after win. What Starbucks did instead was settle, send their employees to racial sensitivity training, closing all their stores temporarily to do that. I remember talking about that here on the show. And then on top of that, what do? They let anybody hang out in the store, no matter what. And almost 7 years later, following the election of Donald Trump, I will add, which I don't believe is some coincidence. I don't. You might think that's crazy. I don't think it's a coincidence. If Kamala Harris had won, I'm not convinced they're doing this. Starbucks suddenly comes around and says, you know what? Maybe the American people are in a different mindset. And our bottom line's getting killed. It's one thing to be woke if you're Starbucks and have your bottom line take a hit, but feel like your moral superiority is worth it, right? Like you might put some intrinsic value on being perceived as morally superior and properly woke. But when your bottom line's getting hit and you don't feel like there's any intrinsic value to your moral superiority, then what are you really doing? What are you accomplishing? And I believe that's what Starbucks came to the very smart and obvious conclusion on here. They're like, it's costing us money, and the American people actually don't want this, and our customers apparently don't want this because we're not selling as much coffee as we used to. Maybe we shouldn't have vagrants all over the place, peeing in the bathrooms on the walls, defecating all over the place. Like maybe at least have them buy a coffee before they do that, John.
Maybe we're not too far from a cover charge.
Yeah.
No, you $2 are going to start. You get your $2 back when you make your purchase.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, it cost me $0.25 to get into Aldi.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A little investment in it.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, right? It's something to your point.
Yeah.
It is something.
It may be feasible in larger areas where it's hard to control.
Yeah.
It's like, look, you're not coming through the door unless I got the cover charge here.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to be a problem in certain places like Overland Park or whatever, but it will be problems in Chicago and New York and obviously Philadelphia, where you had that big story back in 2018. So I don't know how much attention this will actually get, but to me, it's very much in line with what Mark Zuckerberg announced here in the last week or so. Like you're seeing all these things from corporate America start to stack up, and I believe it's largely a response to the American people. We always say in the wake of elections, the American people have spoken. But what I see happening is corporate America also taking that mantra and saying, the American people are speaking. They just sent Donald Trump back to the White House. And not on some narrow majority in the Electoral College. You're talking about an Electoral College win that a Republican hasn't seen in 35 years and a popular vote win that a Republican hadn't seen in 20 years. What can we learn from that? And while we'll gladly knock corporations whenever it's appropriate, I will say credit where it's due to Starbucks.